and welcome to Question Time at City University. I'm Mira Patney. Joining me on the panel today is our guest Peter Hitchens. He's been a columnist and a reporter for the Mail on Sunday for over 10 years. He's also written for The Guardian and The Spectator, and in 2010 he won the Orwell Prize for his work as a foreign reporter. Also joining us on the panel is Eleanor Whalley. She's a broadcast journalist who's worked for BBC Local Radio in Brighton. She's also chaired debates on military intervention in the Middle East at the University of Sussex. Rebecca Burns has worked as a journalist in the Press Gallery in Westminster. She's been a tour guide in Parliament for 7 years, and she's worked as a political researcher for the last 2 election campaigns. We also have Louisa Wells, an expert in sociolinguistics. She's written about the sexualisation of young people's language, and she's worked as a sexual health campaigner with the University of Nottingham. And finally, we're joined by Alice Hedworth. She's worked as a sports journalist in South Africa and in the UK for BBC 5 Live, covering football in the North East. Ladies and gentlemen, our panel. Our first question is from Laura Cress, please.
Is military intervention in Syria the answer?
Well, the question of intervention in Syria has taken on a new angle this week as the Red Cross has been given permission to enter the country. But should the UK still be pushing for military intervention? Peter Hitchens, in your column you've written that the West have made things worse for Syria. Do you think that military intervention is the wrong idea?
Well, the first question one has to put is, if it's the answer, what is it the answer to? And a lot of what we do in these places is done because we want to do good, and we end up doing harm. We did a fantastic amount of harm, for instance, in Iraq. We have done, though hardly anybody realizes it yet, a great deal of harm in Libya, which is pretty much a failed state following our intervention there, run by gangs. And there's absolutely no reason to believe that it'll be any different in Syria. Part of the problem with Syria, of course, is that we don't actually know very much about it. And particularly Western governments know very little about it. And what would the purpose of our intervention be? But the other thing which worries me enormously is that people cry out for these interventions. They see on television something horrible and they think something must be done. They think because it's easy or apparently easy to get a television crew into a place where hellish things are going on, that it will be equally easy to get an army of 10 or 20,000 people in, or surgically to drop bombs on the right people, miraculously not killing anybody who's innocent.
Well, Eleanor Whalley, what can be done?
But at the same time, we can't simply ignore the carnage that's taking place. The UN released this week that over 6,000 civilians have died. It's strategically foolish. I would say that the answer is that you actually have to look at Assad and his military elite.
But hang on, you say you can't ignore it. We did ignore it. Exactly the same thing happened in 1982 when Assad's father completely flattened the city of Hama, and nobody cared in the slightest. It's barely known in the West. At the time, we also, as far as I can recall, have done nothing to punish the Chinese government for Tiananmen Square.
Well, for one, we can't act as the world's policemen.
No, indeed we can't. But in fact, if your outrage is selective, it seems to me not to be genuine.
Well, I would say that the answer isn't military intervention. I agree, it never actually works.
I would say that humanitarian interventions, obviously the most important thing right now. There was 100,000 people in Homs. The Red Cross have been given permission to go in. Whether they actually get into Homs is the issue. If they aren't allowed to, when they get into Homs, carry out the duties they want to carry out, then maybe military intervention might be the right answer.
Rebecca Burns, 7,500 people have died in Syria already. Would intervention cost more civilian lives?
Well, in Libya there were reports that up to 30,000 people died ultimately, and I think military intervention and actually any further international intervention would only result in more casualties than there currently are. I know what's going on in Syria is entirely unpleasant, but when the international community step in, Syria just becomes a map on which international politics are played out.
Okay, thanks, Becca. Well, I'm afraid we have to move on. Our next question is from Becca Outfield.
With teen pregnancy rates on the decline, is sex education working?
Well, this is following on from the report released by the Office of National Statistics on Tuesday, which said that the teen conception rate is at its lowest for 40 years. Louisa Wells, you worked as a sexual health campaigner. Do you think these figures are directly related to a focus on sexual health education in schools?
I think you can't directly relate the drop to anything in particular, but I do think that sex education is working. I think the facts speak for themselves. It's gone down, for conception rate for under 18s has gone down by 7.8% in a year. And over the last decade, it's been a downward trend in general, ever since the previous government decided to make sex education a priority on the national curriculum. It's gone down by 23.8% over a decade, which is a significant amount. It's not the 50% they were aiming for, but it is significant. And I speak to these kids, and they really appreciate the sex education they get in schools, and what they don't appreciate is the sort of notion that, well, they shouldn't be doing this, so why should they know about it?
Peter Hitchens, surely sexual education is the best defence against underage pregnancy?
Why is it the best defence against anything? It strikes me that the human race would long ago have died out if we needed school teachers to tell us how to make babies. And it is also, it seems to me to be the case, that if adults in any other circumstance talk dirty to 12, 13, 14-year-olds, let alone 6 or 7 or 8-year-olds, we'd arrest them. But when it's called sex education, it's all right. Most sex education really got underway in this country beginning in the late 50s on the excuse that underage pregnancy was increasing, and has accelerated ever since until it's become an enormous and all-pervading feature of life in schools, while actually, interestingly enough, religious education has been almost completely stamped out. During that time, not merely the amount of unwanted or underage pregnancy, but the amount of sexually transmitted disease has steadily gone up.
Louisa Wells, very briefly, would you like to come back?
At the moment, there's a fantastic effort being made by the government to get people to use the morning after pill, which is effectively an abortion pill. And of course, there's been a huge effort by governments and indeed the abortion charities to get people to have abortions, which is an annual massacre of 180,000 innocent human beings. And this is not the solution to the problem. Sex education was invented by George Lukács, a Hungarian communist.
Peter, can I just bring in
I'm
on that?
I'm sorry, I really
specifically
Peter.
and overtly to debauch the young.
I'm really
Okay,
sorry, I
Peter.
object to your...
Peter, we've heard your point. Can we go to
I-
Ellie?
I object to the notion of the
We haven't
morning
heard it
after pill as an abortion pill, for
That's
one,
what it is.
because frankly, a woman's choice in terms of having a baby is her issue. But it's
What about
also...
the baby? Does that have no choice?
I'm
It's not
focusing
human.
on the importance of contraception in this, because actually, frankly, I think sex education in terms of is actually slightly irrelevant in this because
I
of the...
completely disagree
But
with
the
that.
fact
I
is...
think, no, the fact that children are being taught sex education in schools, surely the younger you teach a child sex education in school, then through their lives, then they can practice safe sex. We've still got the highest teen pregnancy rates in Western Europe, and we've got pregnancy rates that are 5 times that of the Netherlands. Surely the younger we teach children about safe sex, the more that we can do to assess that situation.
Alice, I'm afraid, sorry, Ellie, I'm afraid we're going to have to leave it there on that topic. Our next question is from Helen Regan.
Has the Leveson inquiry shown that the police are just as untrustworthy as the press?
Well, new evidence about alleged corruption between the police and the press has come to light this week from the witnesses giving evidence at the Leveson inquiry. John Yates, the former Metropolitan Commissioner, has been accused of having an inappropriate relationship with the press. Rebecca Burns, should we be lumping the press and the police together?
I would agree that neither party has come out looking good from the Leveson inquiry, the police particularly so over the last week because they have been focused on. But you certainly can't lump the two together. The police are there to be the bastions of public good and to represent authority in society, whereas the press are there to chase stories.
But,
when the police do wrong, they just do wrong. There is no defence. When the press do wrong, it's in pursuit of something else.
But I would say that actually what group looks worse, whether it's the press or the police, is slightly irrelevant. What the Leveson inquiry actually needs to tackle is the reason behind the stories and this disregard for the law. And I would say that it's in the newsroom culture, this idea of profit and speed over accuracy in law. And that's what the Leveson inquiry should be looking at, tackling the root of the problem.
Peter Hitchens, do you think this situation has just been blown out of proportion?
Not out of proportion, no. Obviously, if there is police corruption, and that's a matter for the courts, not the Leveson inquiry, then it's a very serious matter. My own trade is, when I joined it many years ago, I did not think I was signing up to the Sisters of Mercy. And it's not, and has never been in this country, an entirely respectable activity. We sometimes do things we shouldn't, but it is, as you rightly pointed out, Rebecca, a very different thing for the police, who are sworn as individuals when they join to uphold the law without fear or favour, which we are certainly not in journalism. For the police, for the police to be behaving as they apparently have been. What actually seems to me to be at the centre of all this, and this is not intended to be self-serving, though you're welcome to think it is the enormous, overmighty state of the Murdoch empire in this country, particularly during the Blair years, but encouraged also by the Cameron government, which brought a Murdoch ambassador into Downing Street in the form of Andy Coulson, and which is in many ways the beginning of this whole scandal.
Louisa Wells, the Metropolitan Police lent Rebecca Brooks a horse. Is the relationship between the police and the press a bit too cosy?
I think that the evidence coming out this week seems to suggest that, yes. And I think I don't really agree with this idea of the sort of separating them and letting one seem to take a moral high ground. I think both the press and the police have now descended this week into sort of a tit-for-tat game. I mean, especially concerning the horse issue. It started off, yes, we lent her a horse, but oh, she gave it back and it was in worse condition and all this stuff. I think it's taking stuff away from the real issue at hand, that both of these two institutions, I think the people trust the press, whether we're supposed to be moral upstanders.
Okay, Louisa, I think we're going to have to move on. We've run out of time on that one. Our last question is from Nigel Wilson.
Is there any sportsmanship left in British sport?
Well, this is in response to the suspension of the boxer Derek Chisora by the World Boxing Council after he fought with the former British heavyweight David Haye at a press conference in Germany. Alice Hedworth, you worked as a sports journalist. Do you think the UK does have a problem with sportsmanship?
I think the first thing to address is, what is sportsmanship? If sportsmanship is respect for one another, then yes, we are in fear of losing it. I think when you've got two international boxers who are meant to represent Britain on an international stage, brawling in front of the world's press, that's embarrassing for the country. And also the WBC, they described it as the most embarrassing and worst professional behaviour ever.
Louisa, did the World Boxing Council overreact by suspending Chisora?
I think they might have done, because as far as I can see, it was a humongous PR stunt. As a nation, we like to cling on to sportsmanship as an excuse for being a little bit rubbish. What everyone forgets after that fight is that, in fact, Chisora lost to Klitschko, but no one remembers.
Peter, you once said in your column on the Mail on Sunday, "I hate professional football and everything about it." What would you like to see change in British sport?
I couldn't care less. I mean, I have so many opinions jostling in my head. I just feel there are some things I'm free to have no opinions about. I couldn't care less about sport. I actually want there to be less of it. But apart from that, I don't care. It's so
Okay.
completely unimportant.
Thank you, Peter. Well, I'm afraid we'll have to leave it there for this edition of Question Time. Thank you to the panel and to the audience.